The stars had spoken. In a quiet room deep inside a palace, men bent over clay tablets by lamplight. The air smelled of warm oil, baked brick, and smoke. Outside, the night over Mesopotamia was clear enough to make a person feel very small. Every star seemed sharp. Every dark space between them seemed deeper than it should be. The men in that room were scholars, priests, astrologers. They had spent years learning how to read the sky the way other men read a field, or a flock, or the level of water in a canal. They looked up, they looked down, they matched the stars above to the signs pressed into clay below, and what they found was not good. The omen said the king would die. In ancient Mesopotamia, that was not just bad news for one man. The king was not only a ruler, he was the hinge between palace, temple, and field. He led armies, judged disputes, raised walls, dug canals, and fed the gods with proper offerings. If the king died at the wrong time, the danger was thought to spread outward, into the palace, into the city, into the land itself. So the court had a plan. A strange one, a cold one, but a plan. If the sky called for the life of a king, the kingdom could give it a different king, not the real one. Another man. He might be poor, he might be a prisoner, he might be a gardener, a laborer, or simply someone with no strong hand behind him. Someone who could vanish from the records with barely a mark in the clay. The court would bring him in, wash him, dress him in royal cloth, set rings on his hands, put a crown on his head, and then, for a short while, they would seat him on the throne. For those days, or weeks, or months, he became the king, not in full truth, but in ritual truth. And sometimes, in the ancient world, ritual truth was enough. The real king would step aside and wait in safety, hidden from the danger that had come down from the stars. The borrowed king would sit in his place and receive the doom meant for him. When the dangerous span had passed, the ritual ended, the substitute died, the omen was satisfied. The true king returned to rule as if the kingdom had merely paused to take a breath. It sounds like something from legend, but it was real. We know of this custom most clearly from later Mesopotamian records, above all from the time of the Assyrian king Esarhaddon, who ruled in the 600s BCE. His court took celestial omens very seriously. His scribes recorded substitute kings set up during dangerous signs. That is later than the world we are entering tonight. Much later. Still, historians think the idea itself was older, rooted in a long Mesopotamian habit of reading heaven and earth as parts of the same great system. We cannot always trace the practice in a straight line back to 2500 BCE. The evidence is uneven, but the fear behind it and the logic behind it belong deeply to this world. A world where the sky was not background. A world where it watched back. It is a hard image to shake. A man from the lower streets, perhaps with dust still in the cracks of his heels, suddenly brought into rooms built for kings. Servants washing him, scented oil on his skin, gold at his wrists, fine cloth where rough wool used to hang, bowed heads all around him, a royal meal set down before him, bread, dates, beer, meat perhaps, if the table was rich enough. And all the while beneath the gold and the ritual, one fact sat with him like a stone. This was not luck. This was not rescue. This was the slow kindness of being chosen to die in someone else's place. Somewhere else in the palace, the true king waited, safe, quiet, alive. And after the danger had passed, he returned to work. Back to petitions, temple gifts, walls, taxes, canals, messengers, judgments, grain tallies, and all the grinding tasks of rule. The machinery of the state moved on. The clay kept being written on. The ovens kept firing tablets hard. The fields kept waiting for water. That may be the strangest part of all. Not that the ritual happened, but that life continued so calmly around it. Because for most people in Mesopotamia, the palace was far away even when it stood in the same city. Most people did not live in bright halls. They lived in mud brick houses. They lived in lanes so narrow that two donkeys would have to think carefully before passing each other. They lived where grain dust hung in the air, where dogs slept in doorways, where children carried jars, where neighbors knew each other's coughs and footsteps through the wall. Those were the people who made the city run, and those are the people we are going to follow. Not the king on the throne, not the man in borrowed gold, but the ones below them both, the ones in the lower city. In the south, near the land was flat and shining in places, cracked and dusty in others. The rivers did not simply sit there like blue lines on a map. They moved, they spread, they flooded, they shifted their banks over long stretches of time. Men cut canals and ditches to guide the water where they needed it to go. Reeds thick as walls grew near marshy edges. Mud clung to sandals. Boats slid through channels where roads would have failed. This was the land later called Mesopotamia, from a Greek name meaning the land between rivers. But the people living there long before Greek was spoken did not need a grand name for it. It was simply the world they knew. A world of river water, barley, reeds, brick, dust, fish, heat, and labor. The great cities rose from that mud, or Nippur, later Babylon. Their walls, houses, workshops, and shrines were built mostly from what the land gave in plenty. Mud. Mud mixed with chopped straw. Mud pressed into molds. Mud dried in the sun until it became brick. A hard rain could hurt it. A careless drain could weaken it. So a city needed constant tending. Walls were patched. Roofs were mended. Streets were raised as old layers crumbled and new ones were built above them. Over centuries, the cities rose on the backs of their own ruins. Nothing about that life was neat. Nothing stayed finished for long. In the richer parts of a city, near temples or official buildings, you might see baked brick, stronger and dearer. In the lower city, most walls were sun-dried mud brick, the color of brown bread. A house might look plain from the street, almost sealed shut, with blank outer walls that kept out heat and prying eyes. Inside, there could be a small open court, a place for light, air, work, talk, and the many tasks that made a home into something more than shelter. Rooms opened around it. Storage jars stood against walls. A staircase might lead to the roof. The roof mattered. On hot nights, people may have slept there, or sat there, or spread things out to dry. Some details are hard to pin down with certainty. Historians still argue over the exact use of space in many homes. But from archaeology at and elsewhere, we know these houses were not random heaps of mud. They had plans, corners, drains, courtyards, sometimes even family tombs beneath the floors. The dead stayed very near the living. That closeness to the dead tells you something quiet and important. These houses were not only places to eat and sleep, they were places to belong. And yet life inside them was never soft for long. Summer in southern Mesopotamia could be fierce. Heat pressed down on roofs. Dust drifted into corners. Water had to be fetched. Grain had to be ground. Bread had to be baked before the day grew cruel. Insects hummed. Smoke from ovens and lamps could sting the eyes. The smell of animals was rarely far away. nor was the smell of people. Soap, as we think of it, was not neatly lined up on a shelf. Cleanliness existed, of course. People washed, oiled their skin. Morning begins quietly along the river. Before the city fully wakes, the land itself stirs first. A pale grey light spreads across the flat plains of southern Mesopotamia. The air is still cool for a short while. Mist hangs low over the slow water of the Euphrates. Reeds whisper in the faint breeze. Somewhere far off, a bird calls across the marsh. This is the land people later called Mesopotamia. The name comes from Greek words that mean the land between rivers. The two rivers are the Tigris and the Euphrates. They begin far away in mountains to the north and travel hundreds of miles across the plains before spreading into marsh and sea. 4,000 years ago, these rivers shaped almost everything. They fed the fields, they filled the canals, they carried boats heavy with grain, wool, timber, and clay jars. Without them, the land would have been harsh and dry. With them, it became one of the first places on earth where large cities could grow. But the rivers were not calm servants. They flooded often, sometimes gently, sometimes with wild force. A sudden flood could break canals, drown fields, and carry away the hard work of months. A weak flood could leave the soil dry and poor. So people here learned early that water had to be guided. They dug canals, long, narrow channels that carried river water far into the fields. From above, the land would have looked like a network of thin blue lines spreading out across the plain. Maintaining those canals was constant work. Silt gathered quickly, walls collapsed, gates needed repair. If the canals failed, the crops failed. And if the crops failed, the city would soon feel it. Because the cities of Mesopotamia were large for their time. Much larger than the villages that came before them. Take Ur, for example. By around 2000 BCE, Ur may have held tens of thousands of people. That made it one of the biggest cities on earth at the time. A dense place of houses, temples, workshops, and crowded streets built from the same brown mud brick. From far away, a traveler approaching Ur might first see the city wall. Walls were common in Mesopotamian cities. Thick barriers of mud brick meant to keep out enemies, raiders, and wild animals from the open plains. Gates controlled who entered and who left, but the wall was only the edge. Inside the city rose slowly in layers. At the center stood the temple complex. In Ur, this sacred place honored the moon god Nana. Towering above the surrounding buildings was the ziggurat, a step temple platform built in stages of brick. It rose like a great stairway toward the sky. The version we see today was rebuilt by Ur-Nammu, the king who ruled around 2100 BCE and founded the third dynasty of Ur. His builders stacked thousands upon thousands of bricks to create the massive platform. From the lower city streets, the ziggurat would have dominated the view. Its terraces bright with plaster, its stairways climbing upward, priests moving along its upper levels with offerings for the god. But the temple was not only a place of prayer, it was also a place of work. Temples in Mesopotamia were powerful institutions. They owned fields, animals, storehouses, and workshops. Many people worked for them. Weavers spinning wool, farmers tending temple land, bakers preparing bread for offerings, scribes recording deliveries of grain and oil. Some workers received rations in return for their labor. Clay tablets from the Ur III period list barley payments measured carefully for men, women, and children attached to temple households. These records may look dull at first glance, but they show how closely daily life was tied to the great institutions of temple and palace. Moving away from the temple district, the streets narrowed. This was the lower city. Rows of houses leaned close together. Their outer walls were plain. No windows faced the street. This helped keep out heat and noise, and it protected the privacy of the family inside. From the street, a house might appear simple. Just a heavy wooden door set into a wall of mud brick. But once the door opened, the inside could feel very different. Many houses were built around a small courtyard. Sunlight fell into this open space. Air moved through it. Children played there, women ground grain. Laundry dried on lines stretched across the open square. Around the courtyard stood several rooms, a kitchen, sleeping spaces, storage rooms filled with clay jars of grain or oil. Sometimes a staircase climbed up to the roof. Roofs were flat and useful. People could sleep there during hot nights. They could also work there spreading dates or grain to dry under the sun. Archaeologists learned much about these houses during excavations at Ur, led by Leonard Woolley in the early 20th century. Woolley uncovered entire neighborhoods frozen in the layers of earth after thousands of years. Streets appeared, doorways, drains, cut into the ground to carry away water. Some houses even held family graves beneath the floors. When someone died, the family sometimes buried them inside the home. The living walked above the dead each day. It was a quiet reminder that family stretched backward as well as forward. Step outside again, into the street. The sun is climbing now. Light touches the upper walls. Shadows shrink. The street itself is uneven. Packed earth mixed with broken bits of pottery and brick. Years of footsteps have worn shallow paths into the surface. A donkey cart might pass, wheels creaking slowly. The animal's hooves leave small prints in the dust. A dog sleeps against a wall. Nearby, someone empties a jar of water into a narrow drain that runs down the side of the street. Water disappears quickly into the soil. Above, pieces of cloth hang from roof edges to dry. Voices begin to rise. Cities like Ur were not quiet places once the day began. You might hear the steady scrape of a millstone as someone grinds barley into flour. You might hear the slap of wet clay as a potter shapes a jar. Metalworkers hammer copper tools on small anvils. Donkeys complain loudly about their burdens. And always there are people talking. Neighbors greeting each other. Merchants calling out their goods. Children shouting while they run through the lanes. Markets often gathered near open spaces or near temple districts. There traders exchange goods brought from many directions. Barley from nearby farms. Dates from palm groves. Fish caught in the rivers and canals. Wool from sheep raised on the plains. Some goods came from much farther away. Wood floated downriver from northern lands. Copper traveled from mountains to the east. Precious stones like lapis lazuli arrived after long journeys from regions that are now part of Afghanistan. These trade networks were slow but steady. Boats moved along canals and rivers. Caravans crossed dry land with donkeys carrying loads. Little by little, goods flowed into the cities. Money, as we think of it, did not fully exist yet. Instead, value was often measured in weight. Silver could be weighed on a balance, but everyday exchange often used barley. A worker might be paid in grain. A family might trade jars of oil for cloth. A record scratched onto a clay tablet might note how many measures of barley changed hands. Society in these cities had layers. At the top stood the king and the royal household. Below them were officials, priests, wealthy merchants, and skilled scribes. Then came the wide middle of farmers, craft workers, traders, and laborers who made the city run. Below them were dependents tied to temple or palace households. And at the bottom were enslaved people whose freedom had been lost through war, debt, or punishment. Life was different at each level, but everyone lived under the same sky, and everyone shared the same crowded streets. A potter might pass a priest. A merchant might pass a farm worker bringing vegetables to sell. A scribe carrying tablets might step aside for a cart piled high with jars. The city mixed lives together in the city wakes slowly. At first the streets remain quiet. A pale band of light spreads along the horizon beyond the fields. The rooftops of Ur catch that light before the narrow streets below do. Mud brick walls turn from deep brown to soft gold as the sun begins its climb. The air still holds a trace of night's coolness. For a short while, the heat has not yet taken hold. Inside one of the lower city houses, someone stirs. The house is small. From the street, it looks almost plain. Just a wooden door set into a wall of sun-dried brick. But inside, the rooms gather around a small courtyard open to the sky. The courtyard is the heart of the house. It is where light falls first. A man wakes before the others. He lies on a woven reed mat spread across the floor. During the hottest months, he may have slept on the roof where the night air moves more freely. But tonight, he slept below, inside the house. He sits up slowly. The floor beneath his feet is cool. For a few moments, the house remains silent, except for the faint rustle of someone turning in sleep nearby. In a corner of the courtyard stands the clay oven. It is shaped like a short round tower, wide at the base and open at the top. The oven still holds ashes from last night's fire. The man kneels beside it. He brushes the ash gently with a stick. Sometimes a small ember hides there waiting. If it does, the morning fire will come easily. If not, someone must strike sparks again. Today, the ember survives. A faint red glow appears when the ash shifts. He feeds the ember thin bits of reed and dry straw. The flame grows slowly. Soon the smell of smoke drifts upward into the open courtyard. Across the house, another figure wakes. A woman rises quietly and wraps a wool garment around her shoulders. The cloth is simple but strong. Wool was the most common fabric in Mesopotamia, woven from the fleece of sheep raised on the plains. Textile work was everywhere in these cities. Temple workshops employed rows of women spinning thread and weaving cloth. Tablets from the time of Shulgi, the king who ruled Ur around 4,000 years ago, list groups of workers producing wool garments for the state. But inside a family house, the work feels smaller and closer. Clothing must still be cleaned, repaired, folded, set out for the day. The woman steps into the courtyard. The first smoke from the oven curls upward. She nods quietly. Morning has begun. Near the doorway, two children still sleep. Their hair lies tangled across their reed mats. One arm stretches out across the floor. Soon they will wake too, though perhaps not with the same enthusiasm as their parents. Mornings have never been especially popular with children. Some things do not change across the centuries. The fire in the oven grows stronger now. The woman brings a clay bowl from the storage room. Inside the bowl sits coarse barley flour. Barley was the great grain of Mesopotamia. Wheat existed too, but barley grew better in the salty soil left behind by years of irrigation. It was tough, reliable, perfect for bread and beer, the two foods that form the center of daily meals. She adds water. Her hands mix the dough slowly. Soon, a soft round loaf takes shape. Grinding the grain was the hardest part. That work often happened the evening before. A heavy stone rested on the floor beside a larger flat stone. Grain was poured between them, and the upper stone pushed back and forth again and again until the kernels broke down into flour. The sound of that grinding filled countless homes across the city. A low scrape, a pause, another scrape, hour after hour. It was patient work, and it never truly ended. Outside the house, the street begins to stir. Footsteps pass by the door. A neighbor opens her own courtyard gate. Someone calls quietly to another person farther down the lane. The children inside the house begin to wake. One rubs his eyes. The other sits up slowly, staring at the morning light entering the courtyard. Soon they are both moving. A splash of water across the face helps. The water comes from a tall clay jar standing near the wall. Yesterday, someone carried that jar home from the canal. Today, it will have to be filled again. Water shaped daily life here. Few houses had their own wells. Most families fetched water from canals, public wells, or riverbanks. That meant regular trips through the streets carrying heavy jars balanced on the shoulder or hip. Children often helped with this task. Their steps were careful. A broken jar meant a long walk back with empty hands. After washing, the children dress. Their clothes are simple wool garments tied at the waist. In warmer months, clothing could be very light. The southern Mesopotamian heat did not invite many layers. Hair is combed with a wooden or bone comb. Sometimes scented oil is rubbed lightly into the hair or beard. Mesopotamians cared about appearance. Even ordinary workers liked to look tidy when possible. Cosmetics existed too. Kohl darkened the eyes. Perfumed oils softened the skin. These were not only luxuries of the rich, though the rich certainly enjoyed them more often. Breakfast is simple. The woman presses the barley dough flat and sets it inside the hot oven. Soon, the smell of baking bread fills the courtyard. A small dish of dates sits nearby. Dates grew well along the rivers. Palm groves lined many canals, their tall trunks rising above the fields. The fruit was sweet and easy to store. Bread and dates, a practical start to the day. Sometimes the meal might include a cup of beer. Mesopotamian beer was thick and cloudy, made from fermented barley bread. It contained pieces of grain floating inside. People often drank it through long reed straws to avoid swallowing the solids. Clay cups and straws found in archaeological sites show just how common this drink was. Beer was not only for celebration, it was everyday nourishment. Workers received beer rations. Children drank weaker forms of it. The taste would likely surprise a modern visitor, but for the people of the city, it was normal. The bread is ready. The family eats together quickly. The day outside is growing louder. Work waits. After the meal, the house begins to empty. The father ties his belt tighter around his waist. He steps toward the doorway. Before leaving, he checks a small storage jar in the corner. Inside lies the family's remaining barley. Enough for several days, perhaps. The potter's wheel turns. Not fast. It does not need to be fast. It turns with the patient speed of a thing that will still be turning long after the morning has passed. A hand steadies the clay. Another hand wets it. The lump rises, narrows, widens, and slowly becomes a jar. Not a fine jar for a palace feast, Not a painted treasure, just a strong one, a useful one, the kind that will hold barley, beer, oil, or water in some dark room for months at a time. That is much of work in ancient Mesopotamia, not grand work, useful work. The potter sits in the shade as long as he can. Clay rests in a damp heap nearby, covered with wet cloth so it does not dry too soon. The earth along the rivers gives plenty of clay. That is one reason so much here is made from it. Bricks, bowls, storage jars, lamp cups, drain pipes, writing tablets, children's toys. Clay is everywhere in this world. It is underfoot. It is in the walls. It is in the hand. The wheel turns again. A second jar begins, then a third. By noon, a line of them will stand near the wall, soft and waiting. Later, they will dry. Later still, they may be fired hard in a kiln. Some will crack. Some will hold. Most will disappear into ordinary homes and workshops, and no one will admire them for long. That too is part of their success. A jar has done its job best when people stop noticing it. Across the city, many kinds of work move in the same slow rhythm. Turn, lift, press, tie, carry, count, repeat. In one lane, a man shapes clay. In another, a woman spins wool between her fingers. In another, two boys drag reeds toward a roof that needs mending. In another, a donkey waits with the patience of someone who has given up on ever being thanked. The lower city runs on repetition. That is how a city made of mud survives. Textile work is among the busiest labor of all. Wool comes in from flocks raised beyond the city. Dirty fleece must be washed, combed, teased apart, spun into thread, then woven into cloth. None of this happens by magic. It happens by hand, again and again. Whole groups of women worked in textile production, some in households, others in large temple or palace workshops. 3 tablets record textile workers and the rations issued to them, showing how central this labor was to the economy. Barley, wool, and oil appear again and again in such records, counted out with careful regularity. In a courtyard not far from the potter, a spindle turns between practiced fingers. A woman draws out the wool, twists it, winds it, draws out more. The work is fine, not easy. A thread too loose will break. A thread too tight will not. The fingers learn what the eye does not need to say. Nearby, another woman works at a loom. The threads hang straight. The shuttle passes through, back and forth, back and forth. Hours pass this way. The cloth grows slowly, almost stubbornly, as if it does not want to be made. The weaver does not argue with it. She keeps going. Some cloth will become plain garments for workers. Some will be stored as part of a household's wealth. Some will go out as payments or rations. Some will dress statues of the gods in temple rooms where the air smells of oil and incense. Cloth moves through every layer of society, from the poorest shoulder wrap to the richest fringed robe. It begins here with hands that ache by midday, and there is always more to do. More fleece, more thread, more cloth. Outside the city walls, work is already underway in the fields. This labor starts early because the sun does not bargain. By mid-morning, the light is strong, and by noon, it can feel heavy enough to rest on the back like a load. The fields spread along the canals in long strips of green and brown. Barley is the great crop here, hardy enough for the soil and vital enough to feed both people and state. A farmer guides a wooden plough. Oxen lean into the harness. The earth opens in a narrow line. Behind him, another worker follows with seed. It is not romantic. The plough catches on roots. Mud clings when the ground is wet. Dust rises when it is dry. The oxen have their own ideas about direction. But the furrows continue. Water matters as much as the plough, perhaps more. The canals must be watched. Their banks must be repaired where they slump. Their channels must be cleared where silt gathers. A broken canal wall can starve a field or drown it. The law collections associated with Hammurabi, centuries later, show just how seriously Babylonians took these responsibilities, including penalties when neglect of a dike or irrigation channel damaged other people's land. That legal concern reflects a much older truth of Mesopotamian life. Water had to be managed together, or everyone paid for it. So men stand in mud with baskets and tools. They dig, lift, patch, stamp the earth firm with their feet. This too is city work, even though it happens beyond the wall. City eats through its fields every day. Each loaf baked in a courtyard begins out here. Each cup of beer begins out here. Every ration tablet with its neat measures of grain points back to these long, hot strips of land. Canal labor has a sound of its own. Not loud, just steady. The thud of a basket set down, the scrape of a wooden shovel, the slap of wet mud against a bank. A call passed from one worker to another. Then the same sounds again. In the city, a baker kneads dough. In the field, a laborer patches a canal wall. Both are touching the same story from different ends. Back inside the walls, the workshops keep moving. A coppersmith squats near his tools. Copper is precious enough that scraps matter. Bent pieces are saved. Broken bits are melted. A tool head may pass through many hands and many repairs before it is finally too worn to bother with. The smith heats, hammers, cools and sharpens. A blade for cutting reeds. A point for boring a hole. A fitting for a door. Not every day brings a fine dagger. Most days bring ordinary repairs. Tap, turn, tap again. A carpenter works more rarely in the south, where good wood is harder to get. Timber often has to come from elsewhere, floated or hauled over distance. That makes wood valuable. A door beam, a chest, a roof support, a cart frame, the handle of a tool, all carry the quiet memory of travel. The carpenter measures carefully because waste is expensive. A reed worker sits in another yard. Reeds are common near marshes and channels. They become mats, baskets, screens, light parts of roofs, bindings for all sorts of things no one bothers to praise because life would fall apart without them. Pause. This is one of the gentle truths of the ancient city. The most useful work is often the least sung about. Even writing, which feels grand to us now, could be dull in the moment. A scribe in a storehouse sits cross-legged with clay tablets stacked beside him. Deliveries come in. Deliveries go out. Barley measured, oil measured, wool measured, names listed, dates noted by year name, supervisors checked, workers tallied. The tablets from Ur-3 archives preserve this world of counting in extraordinary detail, including monthly barley rations and annual wool allocations for workers. One CDLI publication notes that a male worker usually received 1 barrig, about 60 litres, of barley per month, though amounts varied by status and role. The scribe presses sign after sign into damp clay. He must be quick. He must be neat. He must not lose count. A mistake is not poetic. A mistake means someone is shorted grain, or given too much, or blamed later. So the stylus moves, line by line. The clay hardens a little in the heat. Another tablet is started. For all the care of scribes and officials, many workers are paid not with coins dropped into the hand, but with rations and weighed goods, barley, oil, wool. sometimes silver by weight in certain transactions. The economy is full of counting, but not in the way a modern wallet would know. Much depends on storehouses, obligations and records. Your pay might be measured in what keeps you alive. There is something blunt about that. Also something honest. A family can eat barley. A lamp can burn oil. Wool can become cloth. A silver shekel is useful. A sack of grain is dinner. At the riverbank, another kind of labor goes on. Boatmen load cargo into flat-bottom boats built for shallow water and canals. Jars are packed carefully. Bundles of reeds are tied down. Grain sacks are arranged so they do not shift too much when the boat rocks. One man pushes off with a pole. Another guides the craft into the current or along the canal edge. Water travel is often easier than hauling heavy goods over uneven streets and open land. The river and canal system is not just scenery. It is the road. Goods move along it. News moves along it. Officials move along it. Trouble moves along it, too. A boatman's work looks calm from shore. It is not. Cargo must stay balanced. Banks must be watched. Mud shallows can trap a boat. Wind can help or annoy. The pole bites into the bottom. The shoulders strain. The boat slides on. From to other cities. From field to storehouse. From workshop to market. From one set of hands to another. There are porters too. Always porters. Men with baskets slung from shoulder poles. Men bent beneath sacks. Women carrying jars. Children carrying smaller loads because every family uses the help it has. A city this size never stops moving things around. Fuel, water, mud, grain, fish, wool, tools, bricks. If you stand still long enough near a gate or market, you begin to see that half the city's work is simply carrying the other half from place to place. Pause. And still the wheel turns in the potter's yard. Still the loom fills. Still the canal bank is patched. Still the stylus marks clay. There is a kind of peace inside such repetition. Not ease, not comfort, but peace. A person knows the next motion, and the next after that. Work orders the day. It tells the body where to go. It narrows thought. A hand that is spinning or kneading or digging does not have much room left for grand ideas. Perhaps that is one reason so many lives can be carried through hard places. Repetition does some of the carrying. By now the sun is high. Shadows pull close to walls. The city smells warmer. Dust, clay, animal hide, hot brick, a little smoke, a little sour beer, a little sweat. No one seems surprised by any of it. This is simply the smell of people keeping a city alive. In the houses, the morning's clean order has softened. Flour dust lingers near the oven. Water jars stand lower than they did at dawn. In workshops, hands are dirtier. In fields, backs are wetter. In storehouses, the tablets have grown into small stacks. A foreman checks what has been done. Another task is assigned. Another load arrives. The labor can be harsh. We should not pretend otherwise. Some workers are free. Some are bound by debt. Some are attached to temple or palace institutions and live by the rations they receive. Some are enslaved. Children work. Women work. Men work. Age changes the task more often than it changes the need. And yet, within all this, skill matters. The skilled potter makes thinner jars that still hold. The skilled weaver wastes less thread. The skilled canal worker spots the weak bank before it breaks. The skilled scribe keeps the account straight. The skilled boatman knows from the color of the water where the mud lies shallow. Ancient life is sometimes imagined as crude from beginning to end. It was not crude. It was exacting. People knew their materials: mud, wool, copper, reed, wood, water, grain. Each one had its mood, its weakness, its stubborn ways. To live in Mesopotamia was to learn those moods well. A cracked jar can ruin a week. A missed ration can ruin a month. A failed canal can ruin a season. By late morning, the body begins to ask for food. Not in grand words, just in heaviness, in the arms, in the belly, in the mouth gone dry. The potter leans back from the wheel. The weaver lifts her hands from the loom for a moment. The canal worker straightens slowly, one hand pressed into the small of his back. The boatman ties off near a bank. The scribe rubs clay dust from his fingers. And through the streets, faint at first, then clearer, comes a new smell. Bread warming, onions softening in a pot, barley stew thickening, maybe fish, maybe lentils, maybe dates set out in a bowl where the flies will notice before the children do. The city does not stop all at once, but it begins, little by little, to think of eating. And with that warm smell drifting through the lanes, work loosens its grip for a while, and the day turns toward the table. A pot simmers in the shade. The fire beneath it is not large. It does not need to be. A low flame is enough to keep the stew moving, enough to send a thin ribbon of steam into the warm air of the courtyard. The pot is round-bellied and blackened from many meals before this one. Its sides hold the memory of smoke. Its rim is worn smooth by hands, lids, ladles, and time. Inside, barley thickens slowly in water. A handful of lentils has gone in. Some chopped onion, perhaps a little garlic. If the family has done well, there may be fish too, broken into pieces, or a little fat for taste. If not, the pot will still do its work. Barley can carry a meal a long way. Around the courtyard, the house feels quieter than it did at dawn. The hurry of the morning has passed. The work of late morning has paused, if only for a little while. The light overhead is strong now, but the walls throw a square of shade across the floor. And in that shade, the meal begins to gather itself. This is not a feast. Most meals in ancient Mesopotamia were not. They were practical, steady, built from what the land and the household could manage. And yet, there is comfort in that too. People do not need a feast every day to feel the deep human relief of sitting down to eat. For ordinary people in places like Nippur, and later Babylon, the center of daily food was barley. Barley bread, barley porridge, barley beer, barley counted out in rations, barley stored in jars, barley ground under stone, barley carried home in sacks. It was the grain that held the world together, partly because it grew well in Mesopotamian soil, even when the ground became salty from long years of irrigation. Wheat could be grown too, but barley was tougher, more dependable, less fussy. And in an ancient city, dependable food matters more than elegant food. So the meal begins there, with barley. Near the oven, a flat loaf cools on a cloth. The bread is coarse by modern standards, dense, a little rough. Stone ground flour often carried tiny bits of grit from the grinding process, and over many years that grit wore down people's teeth. Meals leave their marks in quiet ways, but the bread is filling, and when it comes hot from the oven, it smells rich and good. A hand tears off a piece. Steam slips from the center. The crust gives way with a soft crackle. Someone passes across the courtyard. Dates sit in a small bowl nearby. Dark, sticky, sweet enough to feel almost luxurious, though in southern Mesopotamia they were common enough to be woven into daily life. date palms grew well along canals and fields, and they were deeply useful trees. Their fruit could be eaten fresh or dried. Their trunks and leaves could serve in building and weaving. A grove of palms was a kind of wealth, though of the quiet sort. A child reaches for a date before the meal has properly begun. An older hand gently nudges the bowl away. Some things, too, do not change across the centuries. The cooking itself is simple, but not careless. That is worth noting. Simple food still asks for skill. The clay oven must be hot, but not too hot. The dough must be wet enough to hold, dry enough to shape. The pot must simmer without burning. Salt, if there is any, must be used carefully. Onions need time. Garlic needs less. Fish can improve a stew or ruin it, depending on freshness and luck. A good cook in the lower city was not showing off. A good cook was preventing waste. That mattered. Food was work before it was comfort. Someone planted the grain. Someone dug the canal. Someone cut the barley. Someone threshed it. Someone ground it. Someone carried the water. Someone gathered the fuel. By the time a loaf reached the table, many hands had already touched it. Perhaps that is one reason shared meals feel so settling. The work is briefly over. The food has made it through. Now it can rest on the floor between people and simply be eaten. In many homes, people likely ate sitting on mats or low cushions if they had them, gathered in the courtyard where air could move more freely. The open court was often the best place for daily life. Light reached it. Smoke escaped through it. Children could be watched there. Grain could be sorted there. Clothes could dry there. A meal could be shared there without too much ceremony. The family settles in. Not everyone speaks. Not much needs saying at first. Food asks for a little silence. A bowl of stew is set down. Bread is torn and dipped. A date is finally allowed. A cup is passed from hand to hand. And then there is beer. Not the clear drink poured from a chilled bottle. Not foamy in the modern way. Mesopotamian beer was thick, cloudy, and nourishing, made from barley, and often from baked barley loaves used in brewing. It was less a sharp drink than a soft, grainy one, closer to food than many modern drinks are. In some cases, it was likely quite mild. In others, stronger. Recipes varied, quality varied. Brewers, then as now, probably had better days and worse ones. People often drank it through reed straws. That sounds odd at first, until you remember what was floating in it. Bits of grain, sediment. The straw helped a person drink the liquid without taking in every heavy piece at the bottom. In art from Mesopotamia, shared drinking through straws appears often enough to tell us this was no rare habit. It was part of ordinary life. A large jar might sit in the middle. Long reeds lean into it. Hands reach. People drink in turn. There is something deeply communal about that. Not polished, not formal, just close. The taste, to us, would likely be surprising. Sour, perhaps. Thick. A little sweet from the grain. But to them, it was familiar. And familiarity is one of the great comforts of the table. Food in ancient Mesopotamia could be plain on many days, but it was not always dull. There were lentils, chickpeas in some places and periods, onions, garlic, leeks, cucumbers, herbs when they could be had, sesame for oil, milk products, fish from rivers and canals, birds, sometimes mutton or goat, sometimes beef, though cattle were valuable working animals and not lightly eaten by ordinary households. Meat existed. It was simply not the center of every meal. That too feels familiar. Most people in most times have eaten more grain than meat. history can smell less like roasted feasts and more like onions softening in a pot. The rivers helped with that. Fish mattered here. Fresh fish from the Euphrates, from canals, from marsh channels where reeds stood thick and green. Fish could be roasted, dried, salted, or added to stew. A city near good water had options. A city cut off from it had worries. The same rivers that fed fields also fed pots. In temple households and richer homes, food became more varied. Offerings were brought to the gods in careful measure. Bread, beer, dates, meat, cakes, oils. The gods, in Mesopotamian ritual, were fed as if they were honored household rulers, though the people doing the feeding knew well enough that priests and temple staff would deal with the earthly side of that exchange. This is where Enheduanna enters the room, quietly. She lived around 2300 BCE and served as high priestess of the moon god at Ur. She is best known now for her hymns, but her role was not only literary. It was ritual and political too. A high priestess belonged to the world of offerings, temple wealth, and sacred order. Under figures like her, temples were not drifting spiritual places far from daily life. They were structured institutions with kitchens, storerooms, workers, flocks, and records. The gods had their meals, and because temples held land and goods, people did too. This did not mean equal abundance. Not at all. Temple offerings and temple distributions were part of a larger system of work and hierarchy. Some food went to priests, some to officials, some to workers in rations, some marked festivals, some reinforced power. But still, the temple kitchen and the ordinary cooking pot belonged to the same broad world of grain, oil, bread, and measured portions. Even a grand offering begins in the end with somebody chopping onions. There is something calming in that. In the lower city, though, the meal is smaller. The bread is passed again. The stew pot is scraped a little lower. A child asks for more. An adult says wait. The child waits for perhaps 3 heartbeats and asks again in a slightly different way. A fly circles the dates. Someone waves it off. The dog near the doorway has woken and is now taking an interest in the floor. Meals create their own little weather. Warmth, smell, murmurs, the brief soft disorder of hands reaching and bowls shifting and crumbs appearing when no one meant to drop them. And with food comes conversation. Not always important conversation. Often the opposite. A neighbor mentions a cartwheel that broke in the lane. Someone notes that the canal level looked low that morning. A child complains about a lesson at the tablet house. Someone else says the teacher is probably right. No one believes this except the teacher. Gentle humor belongs here. Not loud, just the dry kind that sits at the edge of the meal and smiles a little. A person who works hard learns quickly that eating is not only about feeding the belly. It is about dividing the day. Before the meal, there was labor. After the meal, there will be labor again. The table stands between them like a low, warm bridge. In that sense, the table is part of the city's machinery. Not official like a storehouse, not sacred like a temple stair, but necessary. A worker unfed cannot weave well. A boatman hungry cannot pole far. A scribe with an empty stomach will still write perhaps, but his writing may become less patient. And patience is most of the job. Body asks its share. So the city pauses and gives it one. There were richer foods too, of course. Texts from Mesopotamia preserve recipes, especially from later periods, that suggest a surprisingly varied cuisine in elite settings. Stews could be seasoned in more complex ways. Meat could be prepared with herbs and fats and careful methods. But in the lower city, among ordinary people, even a simpler bowl had its own dignity. It was enough to fill the midday quiet, enough to slow the breath, enough to bring everyone briefly back into the same patch of shade. If you're still with me, a quiet light helps others find these calm histories. The meal goes on. A second piece of bread, a last drink from the jar, a finger run along the inside of a bowl so nothing is lost. Waste was unkindness in a world like this, not moralized, just understood. A household did not lightly throw away what had taken so much labor to bring home. Leftovers, if there were any, mattered. Crumbs mattered, fat mattered, bones mattered. A modern kitchen bin would seem almost rude here. This is one of the quieter truths of old foodways. Scarcity teaches attention. The children slow down first. Their hunger fades into drowsiness almost at once. Heat, bread, and barley drink can do that. One leans against the wall. Another lies flat for a moment on the mat and stares up at the square of sky above the courtyard. It is very blue now, a little too bright to look at long. The adults feel it too, not sleep exactly, just heaviness, the good heaviness, the one that comes when the body has stopped asking and for the moment has been answered. Outside, the city has not gone silent, far from it. A donkey complains somewhere beyond the lane. A hammer still rings from a workshop. Voices pass. A merchant calls. Life continues. But within the courtyard, the edges soften. Someone pours a little water over their hands. Someone wipes a bowl clean with the last bit of bread. Someone leans back against the wall and closes their eyes for a count of 10 or 20. Or perhaps longer if no one needs them just yet. The smell of the meal lingers. Barley, smoke, onion, warm clay, a little beer, a little dust from the street drifting in under the door. And then, slowly, the meal begins to loosen and disappear. Bowls are gathered. The pot is moved aside. The oven will be used again later. The courtyard floor is brushed. The shade shifts a little as the sun moves overhead. What remains is not only fullness, it is the body itself, more noticeable now. Warm from food, heavy in the limbs, a little slick with sweat, a little tired in the back, aware of thirst, aware of skin and teeth and hands and feet. After a meal like this, attention turns naturally inward. To the body that has been fed, to the body that must still keep going, the body that gets dusty, sore, dirty, ill, tired, combed, rubbed with oil, washed when possible, and asked to carry another half day of life beneath the Mesopotamian sun. And so, as the bowls are put away and the last crumb disappears, the table gives way to something quieter still. Not food now, but the person who has eaten it, the skin, the hair, the breath, the aches, the strange practical business of living inside a human body in the ancient world. Water pours slowly from a clay jar. It falls in a thin stream over dusty hands. The water is cool compared to the air. Not cold, but cool enough to feel welcome after the heat of work and the weight of the midday meal. A man rubs his palms together. Dust loosens and runs away in pale brown streaks across the courtyard floor. He splashes a little across his face. The dust turns to mud for a moment. Then it is gone. Life in ancient Mesopotamia was close to the earth. Clay dust clung to sandals. Smoke drifted through courtyards. Sweat gathered quickly under the sun. So washing was not a luxury. It was simply part of the rhythm of the day. Most houses did not have the kind of bathing rooms we imagine today. Water had to be carried in jars from canals, wells, or riverbanks. That meant every splash mattered. A household might keep a basin or bowl for washing hands and face. Sometimes a larger pour of water could rinse arms and shoulders. The act itself was simple. A jar, tilted, water poured, hands rubbed across skin, dust lifted away. Full bathing happened when there was time and enough water to spare. Some people washed in courtyards. Others went to the river or canal banks where the water moved slowly through the city. The canals that fed the fields also served daily life. People drew water from them, washed clothes beside them, and sometimes stepped into them to cool the heat from their skin. The rivers were part of the body's world too. Cleanliness in Mesopotamia did not mean the sharp scent of modern soap. Instead, oils often played a role. People rubbed oil into their skin after washing. Oil softened the dryness left by dust and sun. It also helped lift dirt from the body. A thin layer spread across the arms or legs could make the skin feel smoother again after a long day. Sesame oil was one of the most common. It had a faint smell, warm and nutty. A smell that might linger in a house long after the jar had been sealed again. Hair needed care as well. In the heat and dust of the plains, hair tangled easily. Combs made of wood or bone helped pull those tangles loose. Archaeologists have found many such combs in Mesopotamian sites, their teeth worn smooth by long use. Combing was not only about comfort, it was also about appearance. People in Mesopotamia cared about how they looked. Even ordinary workers might smooth their hair before leaving the house in the morning. A tidy appearance showed respect for neighbors, for work, and perhaps for the gods watching from their temples above the city. For men, the beard often carried special meaning. Images carved into stone and molded in clay show kings with long, carefully shaped beards that curl in neat rows. Ordinary men did not usually maintain such elaborate styles, but beards still mattered. They marked adulthood. They carried a sense of dignity. A beard might be trimmed with a blade or combed with oil. Even a simple beard asked for attention now and then. Women too used oils and small cosmetics when they could. Dark powder called kohl could line the eyes. Perfumed oils might be rubbed lightly into hair. These touches were not always about luxury. They were about feeling human in a world that often demanded hard work and long days. Still, the body was never entirely comfortable. A life of labor leaves marks. Hands rough from tools, feet hardened by long walking, shoulders sore from lifting baskets, backs tight from bending over fields or looms. These aches were ordinary companions. People lived with them the way they lived with dust or heat. Teeth carried their own story. Barley bread, ground on stone mills, often held tiny grains of grit from the grinding process. Over many years, that grit slowly wore down the surfaces of teeth. Archaeologists studying ancient skeletons often noticed this pattern of wear. It was not painful every day, but it was there. A quiet reminder that food and labor were closely tied. When pain did appear, people sought help. Mesopotamia had healers. Two types appear often in the records, the ASU and the Ashipu. The ASU worked more like what we might call a practical doctor. They used herbs, bandages, oils, careful treatments drawn from experience. Clay tablets record mixtures of plants and substances used to treat wounds, fevers, and stomach troubles. Some remedies involved grinding herbs together or mixing them with oil or beer to form a paste. Not every treatment worked, but many were attempts based on observation, a kind of early medicine built slowly from practice. The Ashipu, by contrast, worked in the world of ritual. Illness in ancient Mesopotamia was sometimes seen as a result of unseen forces, spirits, curses, or anger from the gods. The ritual healer might recite prayers, burn incense, or perform small ceremonies meant to drive away whatever had disturbed the body's balance. To modernize, the two roles might seem very different, but to the people of Mesopotamia, they were often part of the same path toward healing. A person might see both, one treating the body, the other calming the unseen forces thought to trouble it. Many healing prayers called upon a goddess named Gula. She was the goddess of medicine and recovery. In temple images, she sometimes appears with a dog at her side, an animal linked to healing in Mesopotamian belief. When someone fell ill, prayers might ask Gula to guide the healer's hands or restore the balance of the body. The request was simple: relief from pain, strength to stand again, another day of breath and work. Childbirth was another moment when the body demanded careful attention. Most birth took place at home. Midwives helped guide the process. They brought experience and calm presence into a moment that could be both hopeful and frightening. Mothers labored in familiar rooms surrounded by family members who waited quietly nearby. Prayers might be spoken. Small protective objects might be placed near the bed. The goal was simple: bring the child safely into the world. Keep the mother safe too. Not every birth ended happily. Life in the ancient world carried risks that modern medicine has softened. But families welcomed children with hope all the same. A new child meant another voice in the courtyard, another pair of hands, someday helping with water jars or grinding grain. The cycle of life continued quietly in these small houses beneath the wide Mesopotamian sky. Even small illnesses could shape daily life. A fever might keep someone inside for days. A twisted ankle could slow work. A cough might linger through a season of dust. Without modern medicine, recovery often depended on rest, herbs, and patience. People learned to listen closely to their own bodies, to rest when possible, to continue when necessary. And most days, the body kept going. That may be the most remarkable thing about it. Despite the sea's heat, despite the dust, despite the hard work, the body adapts. Muscles grow stronger, skin toughens. Breath settles into the rhythm of labor. Day after day, it learns how to live in its place. Back in the courtyard, the washing is finished. Hands dry in the warm air. The jar returns to its place beside the wall. A comb passes briefly through hair. Oil touches the skin. Not much, just enough. The meal has settled. The body feels heavier now, not unpleasant, just slow. The sun begins to move westward. The sharp brightness of noon softens a little. Outside the house, voices drift through the street again. Work will soon begin again too. But for a moment longer, the body rests in that quiet space between effort and effort, breathing, cooling, listening to the faint sounds of the city beyond the wall. And as the afternoon stretches forward, thoughts turn naturally toward the people waiting at the end of the day. Family, children, neighbors, friends. They're the last bonds that make a hard life easier to carry. Because no one in ancient Mesopotamia lived entirely alone. Not in the crowded streets of the lower city. Not under roofs where several generations shared the same walls. Not in a world where survival often depended on the care of others. The body may belong to one person, but life belongs to many. And that is where our story moves next, toward the ties between people, the quiet bonds that held families and neighbors together in the ancient cities between the rivers. Late afternoon light slips into the courtyard. It comes in at an angle now, softer than the sharp sun of midday. The heat has begun to loosen its grip on the city walls. Shadows stretch again along the ground. In one house, a parent sits behind a child with a wooden comb in hand. The child sits still for a moment. Not perfectly still, but still enough. The comb moves slowly through dark hair. A braid takes shape. Strands cross one another with practiced ease. The motion is calm, back and forth, over and under. The sort of small, careful work that passes quietly from one generation to the next. Across the lower city, moments like this happen in many houses. Children are washed, hair is combed, dust is brushed from clothes. A small cut on a knee is cleaned and wrapped. These are the quiet bonds of daily life, not written in law, not carved in stone, but present in almost every home. Ancient Mesopotamian houses often held more than a single small family. Parents, children, sometimes grandparents, sometimes other relatives. Courtyard homes made this possible. Rooms gathered around the open center like small shelters around a shared heart. Voices carried easily from one room to another. Footsteps echoed along the walls. No one stayed entirely alone for long. This closeness shaped relationships. People knew each other's habits, who woke early, who stayed quiet in the morning, who liked to talk long after the evening lamp was lit, who snored loudly enough to wake half the household. A house like this was not always peaceful. Crowded living rarely is. But it meant something important. When trouble came, sickness, bad harvests, broken tools, lost work, there were others nearby to help carry the weight. That mattered more than comfort. Marriage formed the center of many of these households. In Mesopotamia, marriage was not only a personal promise, it was also a legal arrangement. Scribes recorded marriage, agreements on clay tablets. These tablets listed names, dowries, property, responsibilities between husband and wife. They were pressed carefully into clay so that both families understood the terms. Marriage, like many parts of Mesopotamian life, lived partly in the heart and partly in the record book. A dowry might include textiles, jewelry, tools, perhaps a small amount of silver. These goods helped form the new household. The agreement also protected certain rights if the marriage ended or if one partner died. Such contracts may sound formal to modern ears, but they served a practical purpose. They created stability in a world where survival depended on shared effort. After marriage, life continued with its ordinary rhythm. Work, meals, repairs, children. Children were everywhere in the lower city. Their voices echoed in the lanes. Their footsteps ran across rooftops. Their laughter bounced between the narrow walls of the streets. Archaeologists have found small clay toys in ancient homes. Tiny carts, animal figures, little rattles shaped by hand. These objects remind us that childhood existed even in a world of heavy labor and uncertain health. But children did not remain young for long. By the time a boy or girl reached the age of 7 or 8, they often began helping with daily tasks. A girl might assist with grinding grain or spinning wool. A boy might carry water jars or help tend animals. These tasks were not punishment. They were training. Every pair of hands helped the household survive. Some children followed another path. If a family had the means or connections, a boy might be sent to the aduba, the tablet house. There he learned to read and write cuneiform signs. It was not an easy path. Students copied long lists of words, numbers, proverbs, legal phrases, again and again. Practice tablets found in cities like Nippur show the careful lines of young scribes learning their craft. Mistakes were common. So were corrections from teachers who expected discipline. But success opened doors. A trained scribe could work for temples, merchants, or royal officials. In a world built on clay records, writing carried real power. Girls rarely attended scribble schools. Instead, they learned skills within the household: cooking, weaving, managing supplies, caring for younger siblings. These roles might sound quiet, but they were essential. A household that ran well depended on them. Family life also stretched beyond the walls of a single house. Relatives often lived nearby. Neighbors became part of the extended circle. In crowded streets, everyone noticed when something unusual happened. A birth, a wedding, a death. Word traveled quickly, sometimes faster than anyone intended. Clay tablets preserve glimpses of these relationships, not only contracts and accounts, but letters, small messages sent from one person to another. These letters show something deeply human: worry, advice, requests, occasionally affection. In one letter from Ancient Mesopotamia, a father writes to his son about his studies. The father complains that the son has been careless with his learning. He reminds him that education is valuable, and he urges him to work harder. Parents have been giving that advice for a very long time. Another group of letters comes from the palace of Mari, a city along the Euphrates. Among them are letters written by Shiptu, the queen of Mari in the 18th century BCE. Though she lived in a royal household far grander than the lower city homes we have been visiting, her letters reveal familiar concerns. She writes about family matters, about health, about the condition of the palace, about the well-being of people she cares about. Even within a palace, life still carried the same threads of worry and care that filled ordinary homes. Love in the ancient world was not always expressed in the language we expect today. Few tablets hold long declarations of romantic feeling, but affection appears in quieter ways, through concern, through responsibility, through daily acts of care. A parent braiding a child's hair, a neighbor sharing food, a friend watching over a sick family member. These moments rarely reach the official records, but they shape the texture of life all the same. Adoption offers another window into these bonds. Clay tablets record formal adoption agreements. Sometimes a child without parents was taken into a new household. Sometimes an older person adopted someone who would care for them in their later years. In return, the adopted child might inherit property. The arrangement helped both sides. It also shows how flexible families could become when life demanded it. Community mattered deeply in the crowded cities between the rivers. Neighbors shared tools. They exchanged news. They watched one another's homes when someone traveled or worked far away. Arguments happened too, of course. Noise, property lines, animals wandering where they should not. These small disputes appear in legal tablets, but even disagreements form part of the larger web of relationships holding the city together. As afternoon drifts toward evening, many workers begin returning home. Footsteps sound in the lanes again. Doors open. Children rush forward. Someone carries a bundle of reeds. Another brings a basket of fish from the canal. Dust rises beneath tired sandals. Inside the courtyard, the braid is finished. The child stands, runs a few steps. The parent watches with quiet satisfaction. Evening tasks begin. Water jars are checked. The oven is prepared again. The courtyard floor is swept. Above the rooftops, the sky begins to soften. Blue deepens slowly toward purple. Families gather closer now. The work of the day fades. Conversation grows easier. Stories pass from one voice to another. Some stories are new. Others have been told many times before, but they remain welcome all the same. In moments like this, the city feels smaller, not thousands of strangers packed behind mud brick walls, but clusters of families, friends, neighbors, people who share the same streets, the same water, the same long memory of living together between the rivers. And as darkness begins to spread across the sky, thoughts turn naturally toward another presence in their world, the gods, the unseen powers believed to guide the rivers, the stars, the harvest, and the fragile lives of the people below. The temples wait quietly above the city, their towers catching the last light of the sun. And soon the night will belong to them. A priest lights a small oil lamp. The flame catches slowly. First a dull glow in the wick, then a thin, steady light. It warms the clay walls of the temple chamber and puts a soft shine on the offering table nearby. Outside, evening settles over the city. The noise of carts and tools has thinned. The hottest part of the day is gone. In the fading light, the temple seems to grow larger, not smaller, as if dusk gives it back some hidden part of its weight. Pause. In ancient Mesopotamia, the gods were not far away. They were not only beings of myth or story. They were part of the daily order of the world. They had houses. Those houses were the temples. They had meals. Those meals were the offerings set out by priests and temple workers. They had cities, and each city felt the special pull of its own divine patron. In Ur, that meant Nana, the moon god. In Nippur, it meant Enlil, a god of wind, command, and power. Later, in Babylon, Marduk rose to special importance. Mesopotamian religion was deeply tied to place, and temples stood at the center of civic as well as sacred life. From the lower city, people would have seen the temple platform above the roofs, the stepped mass of the ziggurat, the stairways rising, the brick catching the last light. A temple was not only a place to whisper prayers, it was a working institution. Storerooms, kitchens, courtyards, archives, staff, animals, grain, oil, textiles. The gods, in Mesopotamian thought, were served much like royal beings, with food, drink, clothing, and ceremony. That was not metaphor to the people who lived there. It was part of the world's upkeep, so the lamp burns. A bowl is set down. Bread perhaps, beer perhaps, oil, dates, a little incense. The ritual may be formal or plain, but the meaning is the same. The gods must be honored. The city must stay in order. This did not mean every person spent the day in grand acts of worship. Most religion in Mesopotamia was quieter than that. It lived in ordinary habits. A prayer spoken before trouble, a small appeal for health, a whispered promise if a child recovered from fever, a protective figure set near a door, a gesture toward the moon overhead. In many homes there were probably small sacred spaces, though archaeology does not always let us identify them with certainty. Historians still argue about how often formal household shrines existed in ordinary houses and how they were used. But we do know that religion entered domestic life in many ways, through amulets, figurines, blessings, incantations, and the care of the dead within or near the home. Mesopotamian religion shaped daily existence at nearly every level. That matters, because it means belief was not reserved for priests. It belonged to everyone. The woman grinding grain, the boatman tying up at dusk, the father checking the door bar, the child frightened by a bad dream. The world, to them, was full of seen things and unseen ones. A fever might come from bad water. It might also come from divine displeasure. A broken canal bank might come from poor repair. It might also feel like a sign that order itself had slipped. To modern ears, these may sound like separate ways of thinking. To Mesopotamians, they often fit together. The practical and the sacred were not enemies. They lived side by side. The sky mattered especially. We have already met that sky in the first act. The stars, the omens, the fear that a sign in heaven might point toward danger on earth. That habit of watching did not belong only to one king or one court. Mesopotamian scholars became famous for reading celestial and atmospheric signs, and the omen tradition later gathered in collections such as Enuma Anu Enlil, linked eclipses, unusual moons, storms, and other phenomena to the fate of kings and states. In Mesopotamian religion more broadly, priests and scholars sought the will of the gods through omens of many kinds. Imagine the lower city at night, roofs cooling, dogs shifting in alleys, the temple dark except for a few points of flame, and above it all, a sky so clear that every bright star seems deliberate. A person looks up. They do not say, "This is empty." They say in one way or another, "This means something." That habit of meaning ran deep. A strange birth, a dream, a crack in a wall, a bird calling at the wrong hour, the liver of a sacrificed sheep, the path of the moon. Mesopotamian religion was rich with signs because life itself felt uncertain. And signs offered a way to think about uncertainty without being crushed by it. The rivers might flood too high or too low. Crops might fail. A child might fall sick. Armies might appear from the horizon. Belief gave shape to fear. It also offered action. One could pray. One could offer. One could ask a ritual specialist. One could watch more carefully. Even kings stood inside that system. That is where Naram Sin of Akkad enters the night. He ruled in the late 3rd millennium BCE, long before the later empire of Assyria and before the Babylon most people first think of. He was powerful enough and remembered strongly enough that later tradition treated him as more than an ordinary ruler. Some historical examples from the 3rd millennium show kings, such as Naram Sin, receiving divine honors in life, with their names marked by the divine sign. That does not mean every common person thought of kings and gods in exactly the same way, or that all periods handled royal divinity the same way. But it does show how closely political power and sacred status could touch in Mesopotamia. For ordinary people, though, kings were distant, the dead were closer. If Mesopotamian religion had one especially quiet and heavy side, it was the afterlife. This was not, in most texts, a bright place of reward. It was not a green paradise. It was not a shining reunion promised to the faithful. The Mesopotamian underworld was imagined more dimly than that. In broad Sumero-Akkadian thought, the afterlife offered little to look forward to. Later summaries describe it as a distant land of no return, a house of dust, where the dead dwell in shadow without the kind of moral sorting found in some later religions. That sounds bleak, and it was, but it was also familiar to them. The dead did not vanish into nothing. They continued in a shadowed way, thin, distant, dependent. Some texts speak of dust, some of darkness, some of gates, some of the dead as diminished copies of themselves, not tormented in the loud, fiery way imagined by later traditions, just reduced, quieted, made small by death. This is one reason care for the dead mattered. Family members made offerings, poured libations, remembered names. In many Mesopotamian traditions, the dead still needed the attention of the living. To die without descendants or without proper care could be an especially lonely fate, because the dead relied on the living to sustain memory and ritual obligation. So when families buried loved ones beneath house floors or near the home, that closeness was not only practical, it was a form of continuing care. The dead remained near. The living remained responsible. This gives evening a different feeling. The city is not only full of the living settling down after work, it is also full of memory, of parents beneath the floor, of grandparents remembered in small acts, of names spoken softly now and then, of grief made ordinary by time, but not erased. And still, amid all this, religion was not only fear, it was also hope. Not always hope for joy in the next world, often hope for steadiness in this one. Hope that the canal would hold. Hope that the child's cough would pass. Hope that the barley would ripen. Hope that a bad omen could be turned aside. Hope that the gods, if properly honored, would allow another quiet season of ordinary life. There is something very human in that. Not grand salvation, just enough peace to carry on. Even the temple lamp suggests as much. It does not blaze like the sun. It makes only a small circle of light. But inside that circle, the room is readable. The table is visible. The offering is set in order. The priest knows where his hands are. Perhaps belief often works that way, not by lighting the whole world, only by making the next few steps bearable. Outside the temple, the lower city settles. A door closes. A child is called in from the lane. A jar is moved inside. A rooftop conversation goes quiet. From somewhere nearby comes the smell of oil smoke and warm brick giving up the heat of the day. The gods remain above the city in their temples. The stars remain above the gods. And beneath both, ordinary people prepare for night. Some may whisper a prayer. Some may say nothing at all. Some may simply look up once at the moon and feel, without needing to explain it, that they are living inside a world that watches them back. The lamp flickers. Its flame leans, then steadies again. The room is still. Outside, darkness gathers in the streets of Ur, Nippur, and Babylon. The working day is over. The speaking day grows softer. And now the city turns toward the oldest part of every human cycle. The slow settling of night. The lamp burns low. Its flame leans gently to one side. The oil in the small clay cup is nearly gone. The wick glows orange at the tip. A tiny sun inside the dark room. Outside, the streets of the lower city have grown quieter, not silent. Cities rarely become truly silent, but the rhythm has changed. The sharp sounds of work are gone. No hammer, no grinding stones, no carts creaking past the door. Now the sounds are softer, a dog shifting in the dust, low voices drifting from a nearby roof, a child laughing once before being told to sleep, then quiet again. The heat of the day fades slowly from the mud brick walls. They release it the way a clay oven releases warmth after bread is baked. The air is easier now. People move toward the open rooftops. Many homes in Mesopotamia use their roofs at night. The flat surfaces, supported by wooden beams and packed earth, became became cool resting places after sunset. A mat is carried up the stairs. Then another. Someone brings a thin blanket. Another person carries a small lamp. Above the roofs, the sky stretches wide, very wide. Without tall buildings or bright lamps, the night sky over Mesopotamia was bright with stars. Hundreds of them, thousands. The same stars the palace astrologers watched. The same stars farmers used to guide planting seasons. The same stars children stared at while lying on their backs beside a sleeping dog. People settle down slowly. A mat laid flat. A pillow placed under the head. Someone adjusts their position. Someone else sighs after a long day of work. The city breathes differently at night. Cool air moves through narrow streets. The smell of dust fades. The smell of warm brick remains. From a nearby house comes the faint sound of a story being told. Stories were part of the evening. Before writing was common, stories carried memory from one generation to the next. Even after scribes began pressing signs into clay, spoken stories remained alive. One of the most famous was the story of Gilgamesh, a king, a hero, a traveler who searched for the secret of life and death. The version we know today was shaped by a scribe named Sinleki-Unini, who lived much later than the cities we are visiting tonight. But the stories themselves were older. They passed through many voices before they reached clay tablets. A father might tell part of such a story to a child, not the whole thing, just a piece, perhaps about a great journey, or a dangerous forest, or a king who learned that even the strongest men must one day sleep beneath the earth. Stories do not always need endings. Sometimes they only need a voice in the dark. Down in the street, a watchman walks slowly past the houses. City gates are closed for the night. His job is simple. Listen, look, wait, then move on. Night guards existed in many Mesopotamian cities. Their presence reminded everyone that even in quiet hours, someone remained awake. The watchman carries a staff. His sandals scrape softly against the ground. He pauses now and then continues. On the roof, a child points upward, a bright star, perhaps the planet Venus, which appears very bright in the evening sky at certain times of the year. Mesopotamian astronomers watched such lights carefully. They recorded their movements over long periods. But a child watching from a rooftop does not need records. The star is simply beautiful and bright and far away. The conversation on the roof slows. People speak less. Bodies stretch out across the mats. The day's labor begins to leave the muscles. Arms loosen. Feet stop aching quite so loudly. The air grows cooler still. Somewhere a baby begins to cry. Soft at first, then louder. A mother lifts the child, whispers something quiet. The crying fades. The night continues. The rivers flow beyond the city walls, slow, steady, their dark surfaces reflecting pieces of the sky. Boat traffic has stopped, for now. The canals rest. The fields lie silent. Back inside the house, the small lamp burns even lower. The oil is nearly gone. The flame flickers. It leans once more, then steadies for a moment longer. On the rooftops, breathing slows. People turn onto their sides. A hand rests beneath a head. Another lies across the chest. Children drift first. Adults follow soon after. The watchman passes again. A dog lifts its head, then sleeps. The street's empty. The air cools. The stars remain. In the palace, the substitute king may still sit uneasily beneath borrowed gold. Or perhaps the ritual has already ended. We do not know for sure. History leaves some rooms dark, but here in the lower city, The people do what humans have always done when the work of the day is finished. They rest, they sleep, they dream beneath the wide sky of the land between the rivers. And as the night deepens, the city becomes quieter still, until only the faintest sounds remain. The wind across the rooftops, the distant river, the slow breathing of thousands of sleeping lives. The lamp is almost gone. Pause. Only a small glow remains at the edge of the wick. The clay cup is warm to the touch, but the oil inside has nearly disappeared. The flame trembles once, then steadies again. Outside, the city sleeps. Pause. On the rooftops, people lie side by side on woven mats. A hand rests across a chest. A child has rolled half off their blanket. Someone turns in their sleep and settles again. Pause. The air is cooler now. Night has settled fully over the plain between the rivers. Beyond the walls of beyond Nippur, beyond the lands that will one day become the great city of Babylon. The dark stretches quietly over fields, canals, and reed marshes. Pause. The rivers keep moving. The Euphrates flows slowly through the night. The Tigris does the same farther east. Water moving as it always has, long before these cities were built, long after they were gone. Pause. In the lower city, nothing moves for a while. Doors remain closed, courtyards empty. Clay jars stand quietly beside the walls where they were left. A broom leans in the corner. A loaf of bread rests beneath a cloth. The oven holds the faint smell of smoke. Pause. Above it all, the stars. Cold, clear, still. Pause. The same stars that worried the astrologers in the palace. The same stars that guided farmers in the fields. The same stars children pointed to before falling asleep on the roofs. They hang over the plain without hurry. Thousands of years later, archaeologists would dig beneath these streets. They would brush dust away from clay tablets, from broken jars, from beads, from combs, from the bones of houses made of mud and straw. They would read the wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay by scribes who never imagined anyone would study them so long afterward. Lists, receipts, marriage contracts, school exercises, letters, small pieces of ordinary lives, each one quiet, each one patient, waiting beneath the earth. Most of the people who lived in these houses left no grand monuments, no statues, no carved stone walls, but they left something else. They left the shape of their days, morning fires, grinding grain, carrying water, turning wheels, weaving wool, sharing bread, washing dust from tired hands, watching children grow, looking up at the night sky. Simple things, repeated again and again, across generations, across centuries. Cities rise, cities fall, walls crumble, rivers change their paths. But ordinary lives leave deep impressions, sometimes deeper than kings, because the great cities of Mesopotamia were not built only by rulers. They were built by thousands of hands, hands that shaped clay, hands that planted barley, hands that carried bricks in the sun, hands that held children in the quiet of evening. Tonight those hands are still. The work is finished for a few hours. The city rests. A breeze moves lightly across the rooftops. The mat shifts, slightly beneath a sleeper. The dog near the doorway twitches once in a dream, then quiet again. The lamp inside the house flickers. Just once, the flame grows thin, thinner, then smaller still. For a moment, only the glowing wick remains, a small orange thread in the dark. Then that too fades. The room returns to shadow. The courtyard holds only starlight. The city sleeps beneath the wide Mesopotamian sky. The rivers flow. The stars remain. And somewhere in the dark, another quiet night in the ancient world continues until morning returns again.